You're listening to the Garden Organic podcast. As we were preparing this episode, Queen Elizabeth died, and we wanted to reflect on that for a moment. Watching the funeral, it seemed as though the spray of flowers on the coffin had been carefully picked from the garden rather than ordered in from the florist. There was rosemary for remembrance, together with oak leaves, roses, dahlias and scabious. Perhaps the most poignant of all was the myrtle, cut from a plant that had itself been grown from a sprig of myrtle in the Queen's wedding bouquet. The commentators told us that King Charles, a keen organic gardener, had been closely involved in choosing the flowers from his organic garden at Highgrove. What a beautiful personal tribute to his mother, expressed through his lifelong appreciation of plants. Hello and welcome. I'm Fiona Taylor, and together with my colleagues from Garden Organic, Chris Collins and Dr. Anton Rosenfeld, we'll be talking about all sorts of things, including split tomatoes and drip irrigation. Later on, we'll open the postbag to answer your questions about the organic management of playing fields and the sowing of green manures. Chris will be talking to Stephanie Slater, founder and chief executive of School Food Matters. Stephanie came to live in the UK from Australia, and when she went to visit her children's new school, she was told that the bad smell was actually their lunch. From that moment, a new campaign was born to cook school food from fresh. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Organic Gardening Catalogue. This month, they've a very special offer indeed, a heated propagator for just $11.99, saving a whopping £28. Go to organiccatalogue.com/POD7 for this fantastic discount and get ahead with your germination this winter. That's organiccatalogue.com/POD7. And now I'm off to meet Chris in the potting shed. Hi Chris, how are you?
I'm very well, Fiona. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. I'm just enjoying all this colour, just going into the autumn but still enjoying the summer. What's the colour in your allotment?
Well, it's still going, and my sunflowers have just been amazing. I did like a mix of them along the side, down the side of the allotment, and they are still going strong. Cannas are still going strong. And I was out walking this morning. There's anemones, rudbeckias. All these plants are still. I even saw a fuchsia in full flower this morning. So, it's not over yet. I know that the coolness has come in. It feels a bit fresher, but plants still responding, still looking beautiful.
And some of them are so big, aren't they? Like I was walking this morning through the vegetable garden at Ryton, and the verbena has been a joy this year, and it's so tall. But the cosmos is almost as tall. So you've got the white cosmos and the purple verbena. It just looks so fantastic. It really does, and it does lift the heart when the rain comes.
It does indeed. I think it's quite an important reason to look at your planting plans because there's so much can go on. So Emma's been very clever at writing because she knows that the back end of the year, the cosmos will be going, the cannas will still be going, anemones are still going. So plan your months when you plant. If there's a good time to do it, think about what you're planting and how you get the most out of the season because it really pays off now.
I tell you one thing she's done, which really struck me this morning. She's taken all the leaves off the cardoon and she's left the cardoon flowers, which 3 meters tall. So you've got this beautiful bunch of dried cardoon flowers, which of course the birds will love. But just coming through underneath is the new shoots of the cardoon. So this extraordinary plant just looks incredible. It's like it's completely bridging the seasons.
So you've got this very much, it's like architectural, especially again when the winter comes, if she leaves that in, looks very architectural against the grey skies. I really love that. But it's already making plans for the next round, isn't it? You've just got to love the resilience of plants, haven't you? And I think that people kind of make a mistake, especially those that sort of just dabble on the edge of gardening. Oh, it's October. I'll worry about it again next spring. No, every season counts.
And actually cutting back leaves is a very, very useful way of extending the season, isn't it? We've got a lot of squashes coming through, looking absolutely fantastic, but starting to take some of the leaves off. Can you talk us through why that's important?
Well, I do it on the allotment as well. I know Emma at Ryton, she grows them on the ladder, doesn't she? So you get them running up the ladder, which is quite clever because then they hang. But the reason I would remove leaves, I like to try and get the sun in to ripen the fruit up. So actually September, October even can be quite sunny. You can get some quite sunny days. So you want that fruit to ripen. So just cut the leaves out the way so the sun can get in and make sure they're nice and edible. I think the other reason as well is that if you don't do it, they will run away. My squashes will definitely start to invade the next allotment if I let them.
I mean, they are. That's right. They're invaders, aren't they?
Well, in any other world, you'd think they were thugs. I've seen them in Thailand, where they grow them on arches, like polytunnels without the skin, and you can walk through them while they're hanging. It's very clever how they can do it. So it's about making sure you can control them. I like to put one on my compost heap. I plant it into the top of the compost heap, and it grows out from there. And they're also brilliant plants for areas you're not using. So if you've taken over an allotment and it's a very weedy allotment, and you've put some compost down, some cardboard, plant a squash into it or a pumpkin, because it will fill that area out and the land is then being used.
I think that's a brilliant idea. I really do. Of course, it keeps the weeds down as well, doesn't it, at the moment?
Exactly. It blocks the light out, suffocates those weeds.
Have you got any tips for growing squashes in general, though? I mean, for example, how do you make sure that you harvest them at the right time? Because they keep for ages, don't they?
They're very productive, especially towards the end of the season. A lot of the small pumpkins I've got, they'll sit green if they don't get enough sun. And also, when you try to twist them and take them off, if you get resistance off the receptacle, which is the little bit of stalk between the plant and the fruit itself, then it's quite not ready. It will pop when it's ready. The other big thing as well is don't grow too many. Pick stuff out when it's small and make sure you're reducing the amount so those ripen properly. I definitely believe what really helps is a good mulch as well, sort of May, June, because it'll stop the powdery mildew getting in. It'll get a bit of humidity around them. That's a really, really good idea. And of course, a little bit of a foliar feed makes them more resilient plants.
And actually, you don't have to have many to then get loads of seeds, do you? Because they really, really have.
They pack them. Yeah, they pack them.
Some of the skins are interesting. There's one outside it's blue and warty. You can't miss it. It's covered in warts. It really is kind of Halloween-y.
It is, yeah. It's quite apt for this time of year, isn't it?
It really is, absolutely. How have your squashes tasted this year, Chris?
Oh, they're just delicious. They have the small pumpkins as well. I mean, I think they're such an underrated vegetable because they're great for stews. I'll roast them for roast dinners as well. I mean, I might even have a little go at pumpkin pie because that's delicious as well, but I've never tried to make it yet. But I think they're a very underrated, delicious tasting vegetable, especially pumpkins, because we all see them as something you just carve a face into and then throw away after the end of the month. Really, there's a lot more to them than an annual celebration. In fact, in Japan and America, they're big for stews and soups. So I encourage people to give them a go because they won't turn back.
But now the temperature's dropping, it's good to turn our attention to what we can carry on growing. So what can we grow inside to keep on cropping some fresh food over the winter?
Well, my mini allotment, which is one of my pride and joys, because I have it literally, I have it on the windowsill. But what I mean by that is I'll take 4 or 5 old mushroom pallets, the sort of pallets you'll get when you buy other vegetables, and I'll take 5 of them. I'll take an old barbecue tray you can pick up quite easily, and I'll grow microgreens. I'll grow rocket pea shoots, and what you can do is you can have another 5 little pallets on the go. So when you crop one lot, you can then replace them and you rotate them. So you can have that fresh veg. At the moment, everything's getting so expensive. Not only is it fresh and organic, but you're going to save a few bob as well.
I have to say, I do carry on with carrot tops through the winter.
There you go. Nothing better than a carrot top, is there? So
they're fantastic in sandwiches. I absolutely love them, and they're so green. It makes you feel like you're in the springtime. But herbs, of course, there's some really good ones that go on through the winter anyway. The woodier ones. But I tend to bring a pot of mint in. It slows right down, but it will still put a little bit of leaf on and keep going. You can't have it too much, but it can be a real treat. It's nothing like homegrown mint.
Yeah, no, on your potatoes, or maybe the odd mojito if it's Friday night. I don't know.
But of course, it's difficult to buy herbs in the winter. They're expensive. They're not organic. We've talked about supermarket herbs before. It's kind of a bit of a bugbear of ours, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're grown under lights. The plants are weak. They're oversown in the pots. So it is worth bringing something of anything that you've got outside that's been growing outside. It's really worth trying to bring it in for a little bit longer, try and extend the season.
Can you do late sowings as well, Fiona? Would you sow basil or coriander this late, or is it?
I'm not sure I would, actually. But I would for microgreens. That's the brilliant thing is you can keep going with basil right through the winter for tiny, tiny little plants. Yeah. But actually, I think it gets a bit depressing otherwise. It's
waiting for spring, isn't it? That's what it's doing, yeah.
Can't blame it, really. Do you do bean sprouts, Chris?
I do, yes. They're very easy. You can literally do those on cotton wool in an old mushroom pallet if you get the seeds. They're very, very easy to do. And pea shoots are amazing. We've talked about these a lot as well. I mean, for an 80 pence for a box of dried peas, not only will they keep producing because you won't use them all in one go, but they grow and then you crop them and they'll grow again 3 or 4 times. And pea shoots in a fresh salad or a sandwich, absolutely wonderful. And there's no reason to stop doing that because the growing season is ending, because you're growing them and they'll hit seedling size and then you're cropping them. So I very much encourage it.
What's the quickest of those? You know, the mustards and the cresses. What's the very quickest one?
The cress is amazing, but I do Chris's crazy cress heads. In fact, the first day I was on Blue Peter, we did Chris and Connie's crazy cress heads, and you just do a little pot and draw a face on it, and the cress is up in like 3 days. And it's in your egg sandwich. So it's a really good way to engage young children.
We'll be looking forward to talking about that a little later. If we were going outside now, what do we need to think about in terms of planning ahead for spring? I think it's all about bulbs, really.
Yeah, we were looking forward to this last month. I was already revving up, wasn't I? Because I love bulbs. I just love them. They're the most unfussy plants. They just do what they just say on the tin. They lift you out of the winter and into the spring. They're like a bridge between the two places. So I am all about the bulbs at the moment. I'll be doing them on the balcony, I'll be doing them on the allotment, and I'll be doing them at home with the kids who live in the same block of flats I live in, because there's an area out the front that I've took over. So I just think bulbs are brilliant. And also you've got to remember, they can pretty well go from January right the way through to early June, really, so you get this big flow of them. So get the organic gardening catalogue or look at other organic bulbs, because otherwise they're quite a lot of chemicals involved. Have a look, choose, have a pick. They're not massively expensive. It's like a bit like being in a sweet shop.
I'm a big fan of Massia. I know they're a late one because they don't come up till sort of May time, do they? But oh golly, they're beautiful. And actually they've got some in the organic gardening catalogue because I've just had a quick sneaky look. And of course the tete-a-tete, the little tiny...
Yeah. Things I love about bulbs, my balcony looks incredible in the spring because they don't need a lot of space and you can pack them in. Don't be afraid to really pack them in. They're very easy to grow. This is the time, though, to buy them, to plant them, and then you can forget about them all winter. They won't trouble you at all, and they'll arrive in the spring and give you so much pleasure. They're a win-win on all accounts.
If you're putting them in pots, I always worry a little bit about them rotting.
Yes.
Give me a bit of tips on how we could avoid that.
Well, there's 2 things I do. Clean drainage, obviously, is a big one. So my baskets I never had problems with. I use, obviously, a peat-free compost. But the big pots, where it's more likely to happen, I lift them, I put them on bricks. So there's 2 bricks under the pots, and that allows them to drain properly. Also allows them, if you get a cold night, to recover. And just make sure you use a decent free-draining peat-free compost. If you're really worried about it, mix in 20% with horticultural gravel or silver sand, horticultural sand, just to make sure it drains properly. Outside of that, they should be fine.
And what's the latest you can be planting them?
Well, you've still got time, a couple of months, I'd say. So ideally October, because you want them to stick down the roots. If you cut a tulip in half, you can see already the leaves and the flower that come in the spring. But it's all about the roots. Get them in now. They put down a lot of roots. They'll explode in the spring. And I've actually, to let you know as a professional gardener, a bit cheeky, left them right the way up to December in the past and still had a go with them still. But get organised is my message. Don't leave them too late.
It's a very miraculous thing, isn't it? You get this kind of dry, papery thing that looks totally dead. It looks totally dead, doesn't it, outside, and then and then this amazing thing happens. I tell you the other thing that fascinates me is bare root planting. Same sort of thing. You've got this sort of dry thing, and yet it will come back.
Well, I'm a big believer in bare root. As a younger gardener on the parks and botanic gardens, everything was bare root. We didn't buy anything pot. It tends to be localised because obviously you're not going to transplant it over great distances. It's not forced. It's also, this is the perfect time to do it while the soil's still warm and they'll get their roots down and grow. Cheap, local, organic. There's a lot to be said for it, okay? Especially if you want to be planting trees. There's a big push to be planting trees at the moment. You get those young whips, you plant them up now, bare root. You've got more chance of that plant surviving for the first, second season, then it will grow on to be a big tree.
Maybe this is the year I will finally plant that greengage tree.
Yes, exactly. This is the time to do it. It's also a great time to move any kind of plant as we go into dormancy. So if there's a shrub outside your kitchen window and it's 1 metre by 1 metre, maybe bigger, and you're going, that's right in my way, you can move this time of year. Just make sure you dig a trench around the edge of the crown, a trench about 30 centimetres down, 20 centimetres wide, and you'll start to see the root ball. Then gently rock it. And when it starts to really get loose, get a bit of hessian underneath it, Get one of you either side, lift it and replant it. It's the perfect time of year to do it.
So other things that we could be doing, of course, is dividing our plants.
Yes, it is. Well, division is just the easiest and the most productive way to get more plants. It really is. Herbaceous plants are just so easy to do. All those pepitas, all those sort of plants that die back naturally this time of year. Well, a lot of them, after 3 or 4 years, they will get a bit root bound. They'll start to die out in the centre. Lift and divide them into 5 or 6 plants. Replant one. Pot the others up. That's other plants you can give away. Could be a present. Or you want to fill up in other parts of the garden. I'm involved in the local park near me, and they've got a big, long herbaceous border. Lots of plants that have been there a while, and I'm looking at it thinking, wow, that's a lot of stock. I can colour up the rest of the park if we lift and divide these. Very, very easy way to get more plants.
And can you divide your house plants?
You can indeed, Fiona. I've got things like spathiphyllum, anything with a crown that starts. I'll tell you what, I've just divided my banana.
Inside?
Oh yeah. It's just a brilliant little plant. It's given me so much pleasure.
It can't be a little plant.
It's got to about 3.5 foot, so up to my waist basically. And then what happens is that then starts to expire and then it shoots off new rosettes. It's brilliant for vegetative reproduction. So then I'll lift it and break those away and replant them, and I'll have more than one plant then, maybe give one away as a present. Anything with multiple crown, you can divide up, and this is a great time of year to do it because it will sit as foliage. Don't overwater it. It'll sit as roots through the winter and get a good kick-off in the spring.
Oh, gosh, that's a great idea. Of course, there's also that easy-peasy way of propagating houseplants by just, breaking things off and popping them in water. Can you talk us through that?
So very, very easy to grow a lot of houseplants in water. And the reason is a lot of them are tropical. So they're growing in conditions that are very damp and wet. And they'll produce aerial roots in their natural environment anyway as a result of moisture. So things like coleus, begonias, papyrus, you can literally take bits of sections of them, dunk them in a milk bottle, and they'll root after 7 to 10 days. You can then pot them up, either keep them or maybe give them away as presents. I often divide plants and think, I can't throw anything away. I'm terrible at throwing plants away. So I'll pop them in water, root them, and try and carry them on in their lives.
It's wonderful, isn't it, to think that we can just propagate and make more of these gorgeous plants.
Well, it's my favourite thing to do. It just is. Just to produce plants, because it's stock. I've said before the analogy, and I describe it as it's almost like painting. But you have your canvas is the garden and your plants are the paints. And the more you divide and the more you've got, the more you can put that paint on the canvas. And that's a really nice way to look at it, I think.
Let's talk about dahlias for a minute, because mine have been lovely. It's the first year I feel I've really sort of got there with dahlias, and I want to keep it going. So what would you be doing now?
Well, there's kind of two choices, really. I mean, you could just leave them in the ground, to be honest with you. As long as the soil drains okay, you could just leave them there and let them do. I think over time, if you do that, they become weaker. I tend to do that on the allotment because I'm short of time. But if you really got a special one, in the old days when I worked at the old boy gardens, the botanics and the parks, they would lift them and they would take the eyes off. So you've got these long tubers. They'd look at the growth points that are underground very carefully with a knife, carve them off and a little bit of the tuber, put them in a very sandy, free-draining soil in seed trays, keep them somewhere quite cool in the greenhouse, and then they would shoot next year. And there's a big advantage to that. One, it keeps them healthy, but two, it means they're not destroyed by the slugs early in the season. Because once they start to grow, you can pot them up, keep them in pots, get a bit of foliage on them, maybe 10 inches worth or something like that, 25 centimetres. And then when you plant them out late May, they're a bit too chewy for the slugs. They're a bit too much lignin in the foliage and in the stems, and they tend not to touch them. So you've got control on the pest, basically, in an organic method if you're lifting, dividing, and overwintering them you can even do it in a garage if you wanted to. You don't necessarily need a greenhouse.
That is good advice. I think one of the secrets, though, is making sure you label them.
Yes, yeah.
I did mean to ask you, though, about your chilies this year. Apparently you've had loads.
I have. It's been a year of the chili, because I've got masses of them. I've got a plant on my balcony that's pretty much up to my neck in height in a pot. It's huge. I've got them on the allotment as well. What I'm going to try and do is dry them. That's going to be experimental. I've not really done it on this sort of scale before. So we'll see what they taste like.
Have you ever made chili oil? I've been given a top tip about chili oils. The key is you've got to boil the chili up just for a couple of minutes. Make sure it's actually gone through boiling water, because that gets rid of any kind of risk of anything that could then infect the oil. And then you just literally just suspend it in a jar of oil, and that's it. It's done.
And then how would you use that? You'd use that, literally spoon it into food?
Yeah, drizzle it. I drizzle it over things, I tend to if I want to sort of spice things up. I'm a bit of a devil for chili with peanut butter on toast.
That's an unusual mix. Well, there's two things I've got to try now: chili oil and chili with peanut butter. So it's got to be done now, isn't it? It's got to be done.
Excellent. We'll compare notes. And of course, it is the right time of year to be seed saving as much as we can. Have you been doing any of that?
I have quite a few heritage tomato types on the allotment, and they'll all get saved. Make sure I get the seeds dried out, put them on the bit of tissue, and then I'll put them in Tupperware, and they can sit there till next year. My runner beans and my French beans will all get saved as well, because they're given to me by our fellow allotment holders, and I'd like to keep them going. So there's a great time to do it. It's, it saves you money. It's guaranteed organic, so what you can't lose is a win-win.
And it's great for the plants to get the opportunity to actually kind of go through the whole cycle, isn't it?
I think it's great for the gardener too, because there's nothing greater than sowing, growing, and then sowing again. That whole circle of life is it's why we do it, I think.
It's why we do it. Yes, it is why we do it. But one of the things that really motivates you, Chris, is working with children, isn't it? And I know for this month, you went and interviewed Stephanie Slater, who's the founder and chief exec of an organisation called School Food Matters. My goodness, school food does really matter, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It's an apt name.
It is an appropriate name, and it's an issue close to your heart. So tell us a little bit about your passion for working alongside kids.
Well, it's this kind of began really, I suppose it began out of the Blue Peter stuff, because we were doing stuff on screen and we were growing, and then I gradually got known through that, and I came across people like Stephanie who are incredibly passionate about what they do. I think the important thing to say here is we are not trying to tell everyone what they should do, what they should feed their kids. We're not dictating anything. This isn't, something that we think should be enforced. But gardening and cooking and eating healthy food are just great things to do. They're positive things to do. And the spin-off from that is amazing, isn't it? Because you've got well-being, you've got better diet, you've got less people ending up in hospital later in life, so there's an economic argument for it. But putting aside all the politics, it's just such a pure, happy thing to do. And I think my experiences with doing it, and every school you go into, you get this massive positive response. But they might become gardeners as well.
Well, I think without further ado, I'm dying to hear the rest of your interview with Stephanie. So I think we'll move across and hear how that goes now. So Chris is going to talk to Stephanie Slater. She is the founder and chief exec of School Food Matters.
Well, welcome, Stephanie. An old friend of mine and work colleague in some respects, obviously worked for you bits and bobs over the years. So just tell me, School Food Matters, what is it and how did it start?
So, well, Chris, you were there right at the start.
I was,
You were there at the launch, so you've seen the story develop. It happened because I was that pushy parent that was really unhappy with the dinner being served at children's school. I mean, it got a weird, whimsical story of my children going to a Montessori nursery at Bondi Beach.
Yeah.
Where they grew their own vegetables.
Because you were in Australia before this, weren't you?
Yeah. So they grew their own vegetables in a school playground, and then they'd harvest them and prepare them for lunch, where they'd share around an outdoor table.
Yeah.
So I came back to London in 2005 and chucked my kids in the local primary school, and the first words I heard from the office manager, this is an outstanding primary school in London, the first words were, "Sorry about the smell, that's lunch." And there was just, it was a fait accompli. There was nothing that anybody could do about it. And I thought, well, this does not make sense to me. I had 20 years in film production, and we were all about fixing stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to be really easy. And the best thing about me going into this was I had absolutely no knowledge of public sector procurement.
Yeah.
Had I known, probably wouldn't have done it. Because it was a very, very long journey.
Yeah.
But hey, it was a job worth doing. It was a job that needed doing. So that was the school dinner side of it. But the other thing that really chimed with me was this thirst for children to have access to outdoor learning.
Yeah.
So to me, not using the school as a hub of food growing was kind of weird. It was an untapped resource. And then I heard a head teacher say that kids at his school couldn't identify an onion.
Yeah.
So it just seemed to me there was a job to
I remember that conversation about where the potatoes growing on trees and all that sort of stuff we were talking about at the beginning. And that whole concept of kind of, a school is a community area, an area we're all involved in. So it's prime for talking about fresh food, about gardening, welfare, physical exercise, all those things.
Yeah.
But you've come a long way since then. So I'm sitting in your offices now. How many of you working here now?
I think about 22, 23.
22. And that all started with you, didn't it? You were the original.
Yeah, it was me for 4 years because I didn't really know I was setting up a charity.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what I was doing, but I got sunk my teeth in a bit, and I really wanted to get this job done.
Yeah.
And it just created this fantastic opportunity to do more and talk to more people and go into partnership with lovely organisations like Garden Organic. And it was really cool moving into this space, having done all this work in film production, and just the quality of people I was working with. They were so committed to what they were doing and making a little difference or a big difference. And it just sort of makes getting up in the morning a little bit.
I've always been, to be honest with you, and we'll go on to the stuff we've done together a bit later. The Borough Market thing is one that stands out to me. But you've always managed to surround yourself with people who are very passionate like yourself. Is that do you think that's a result of the fact your passion has taken you on this journey?
Yeah.
And you've kind of carried people along with you, haven't you?
Yeah, one of the head teachers, when my kids went to secondary school, she always used to talk about solutions-based thinking.
Yeah.
And it was very much my mantra. It was like, ooh, this is tricky. Yeah. Let's work out how to sort it out. And there's, I think if you have that sort of optimism and, drive, people get off on that. It's quite cool, isn't it, to be around people with that sort of energy that want to fix stuff and can see how much better life can be if you just sort of, dig your teeth in and have a go.
So you got kind of passion and also the ability to delegate, drive stuff.
Yeah. And as I said before, I knew nothing about this world. Absolutely nothing. I could organise stuff and I could run a budget because that's what I used to do.
Yeah.
But I knew nothing about this. Education, procurement, local authority, funds, got no flaming idea at all.
But obviously all this sort of stuff needs... It's interesting you mentioned procurement because obviously you pitch for work.
Yeah.
It needs funding, doesn't it? I suppose in a way that's the hardest part. I think the thing we come up against the most, no matter how good our intentions and what we want to achieve, getting it to actually get out on the ground and in schools, is there a technique you have to that?
Well, I just think, I'm possibly the luckiest chief exec out because look at what I do. I go to people and say, is it a good idea to serve children fabulous, tasty, nutritious food? Yes or no. Is it a good idea that we expose children to the joys of outdoor learning and learn how to grow their own food and become skilled individuals, skilled adults? Is that a good idea? There aren't many people that are going to say, no, that's a really rubbish idea, go away.
So in a way, you have to kind of pull their chain a little bit, don't you?
Absolutely. Nobody wants to be that schmuck that says, no, that's really awful, we shouldn't feed children well.
Yeah.
The interesting piece about what we call the Richmond campaign was that I went in and said, we can do better, we can cook from fresh, when everyone said, no, we can't do that because we've never done it, that sort of status quo thing. And then we had people saying, well, you can try, but it'd be really expensive. And, I was a bit nervous about that because I was taking all these people on a journey and saying, yes, we can, but, I was going to bankrupt the council and I was a little bit worried about that, losing a bit of sleep. But, it's that whole thing. If you take a good idea and people buy into it, and then people go into it with confidence, like the coach won the contract, they just knew that if they serve really good food, they can afford to do it much better because they get the economies of scale.
Yes.
So if you serve children crap food, and it'll go in the bin, and ergo, the financial viability...
So it's quality of product, isn't it? At the end of the day, that's all you're talking about. So
Absolutely.
if you've got something people want, they'll then come. So it becomes a numbers game at that point.
So here we go. It went from 26% take-up across the borough, which gave me the information I need to run a campaign. And then within the first half term, the numbers had doubled.
Yeah.
And the contract, pre the campaign, it was £2.45 a meal for a frozen meal from a factory in Wales.
Yeah.
Post the campaign, when we awarded the new contract, the meal price came down by 30p.
So it actually decreased. It's a bit like the myth of takeaway food, isn't it? So basically, you think you're getting something quick and easy, but it's actually more expensive.
Processed food is expensive.
So I have to ask also, people might say, oh, well, Richmond's probably, it's quite a wealthy area, but you're in Southwark, you're in Tower Hamlets, areas with massive poverty. Do you find a difference between those two scenarios? Are there different challenges involved?
Isn't London interesting, though? In every London borough, whether it's London Borough of Richmond or Hackney, there are going to be pockets of wealth and pockets of deprivation.
So it's not like poverty doesn't exist in Richmond, is what you're saying?
Some of the schools I was working with in Richmond had 52% free school meal eligibility. Some of them had 5%. Yeah. It just depends. And it's the same wherever you are
It's
in London.
A myth that's, this area is wealthy and this one's not, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
But do you think in terms of, so the children there are still suffering from the same problems? They're not getting the garden, they're not getting the welfare, physical exercise, they're not eating well, but those problems exist.
Yeah.
It's regardless of boundary.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are hotspots throughout England and the UK. There are areas that have been forgotten. I mean, they're actually called forgotten areas, forgotten cities. And we're always keen to work where we can have the greatest impact, where the need is. So, as you mentioned, Lambeth and Southwark, we're currently working with Impact on Urban Health through Guy's and St Thomas's.
Yeah.
Because there are 2 London boroughs that in their community, with really high rates of child obesity and low income. And they have seen the correlation.
So they're related, basically.
So we've stopped talking about obesity now, and we've just started talking about health inequality.
Yeah.
It's poor people who have a poor diet.
Yeah.
There's no escaping that. So that's where we're focusing a lot of energy at the moment.
Yeah. And I think I'll obviously put it around to gardening. What I've really enjoyed about the stuff I've done with you, which I also think is really important, is you relate it, the whole seed to plate thing. Quite a lot of people who champion eating good food, but they tend to miss the gardening side out of it. You're not cooking anything decent without producing the produce. Yeah. So the gardening work is incredibly essential, isn't it? And you've always really embraced that. Yeah. How did that come about? Is that gardening as a child? Or?
Yeah. I mean, our strapline is farm gate to school place.
Yes.
And that was partly because I thought it was going to be like dead easy to get farmers to grow the food for the local primary school. A bit more complicated than that. But, you've got to think big.
Yeah.
But it still stands. We want to make that connection. And even if it's anecdotal, you can bring the whole issue alive around disconnect around food. So the boy who was growing cucumbers and the head teacher comes out and he's time to harvest the cucumber and the boy bursts into tears and he says, "What's wrong?" He said, "It's not ready." And the head teacher says, "Look, measure it, it's ready to harvest now." And the boy burst into tears and said, "But the plastic hasn't grown on it yet." That is a true story.
I'll bet.
From one of our myriad of gardening opportunities we've had.
Yeah.
So, as long as kids think that cucumbers grow with plastic around them,
we need to fight this fight. Yeah.
So lots of the programmes we do demonstrate to children that food doesn't come from a supermarket, it actually comes from the soil. Yeah. And we take them out to see food growing at scale. We do this 2 ways. We do it by giving them a seed, which you have done loads of sessions for us. Yeah. And, the awe and wonder of growing a bean, which lots of schools do in reception. Yeah. But we take that a little bit further.
So the older kids is quite important, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah. The other focus that we've got, which I think we're quite unique as far as food education charities, is we have a lot of enterprise through our programmes. Yeah. And if you say to young people you can make a buck out of this, suddenly they think, hang on, there's an opportunity here. And that was partly because we wanted to convert the naysayers.
There's a political angle to that as well, isn't it? Because you might get that, well, why waste your time when these other important things? So by bringing that into play, bringing enterprise into it, you kind of annul that, don't you? You kind of squash that out. So that's quite fundamental if you're going for funding, etc.
Absolutely. It's all about innovation and finding something that will engage schools and not be outside the curriculum. Yeah. We don't want things to be a bolt-on. We want to enrich the curriculum.
It has to. My experience, and you know how many schools I've been into over the years, I have to go in and be part of what's going on. I can't be a separate, because otherwise I'm putting pressure on people that have already got a lot of pressure on them anyway. Yeah. And that's a very delicate game, isn't it? If I go in and say, let's build a garden, the teacher has to think, well, how do I use it in the curriculum, in my the plate I've already got in front of me?
There is, as a charity, over the 15 years we've been doing this, we are never over-prescriptive with our programmes. We never go and do to a school. It's pointless. Yeah. Because then you'll walk away and the whole thing
and it'll just fall apart. Yeah.
We're quite unusual. We run a grants program every year. We give through Whole Kids Foundation in the US. We give away around 70k a year to schools to set up or develop their school gardens. And we are very loose in what they spend it on. So if they need a teacher, a gardener, if they need kit, if they need training, whatever they need to make it happen. Yeah. Because we want it to survive after the key players that you talk about. Yeah. The one champion in the school that makes it happen. It can't just sit on their shoulders.
No.
So we want to leave something behind every single time. So with that, you have to work with what you've got in a school. You're quite right.
So you're trying to empower them with what's already existing,
Absolutely.
basically.
And just give them a little leg up.
Well, let's go on to your garden, because I know you've got a few with you at the moment. So how many guys you got with you?
3.
So you've got 3 and they're actively out in schools all the time.
Yeah.
So they're...
we need more, Chris.
Well, I'll come give you a hand again. You know that. I always enjoy it. And it's good if that expands, because I think the danger for me always is it's become a tick box. Oh yeah, we've got it in schools now. Next, and I just don't think the battle is won by by any degree. I'm sure you'll agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
But what kind of projects are they doing? What are they doing on the ground at the moment?
So we tend to have a gardening element in all of our programmes.
Yeah.
So, for example, we do a lovely honeybee programme.
Brilliant.
So we're teaching children about the importance of pollinators in food production. Without pollinators, we don't have food. Again, that's a lesson they need to learn. That's a connection they need to make. So we do it two ways. We have a beekeeper go into a school with an observation hive so that they can, the awe and wonder of honeybees. And we're also now taking them to an apron. And the kids get the bee suits on.
That's brilliant.
And, it's the most I'll show you some pics, but the most charming, tiny people in beautiful bee suits. And they can pick up frames, they can see the honey. It's just extraordinary. But the one thing we don't do is encourage schools to set up their own colonies.
Yeah.
Unless they are really
They know what they're doing, yeah.
If they've got beekeepers in the school or on their staff, if they've got a local association next to them, that's a different story. But in order to get any cash from us for beehives or
there has to be some form of expertise.
Absolutely. Yeah. Otherwise, because we work very closely with London Beekeepers Association, they are fantastic. But what we're supporting them to do is plant forage.
Yeah.
Because London has lots of honeybees, but it doesn't have enough food.
So basically, you've got a more bees than food at the moment, is what you're saying. Yeah.
So that's what one of the jobs our gardeners do. They go into the school, they plant bee-friendly plants with the children, and take them on the whole lesson about how important it is. You need food, bees need food too. So this is what we're doing.
So you're that closing that circle, aren't you? It's really important.
Yeah. And the other thing is we do lots of, as I say, enterprise programs, and we want schools to come along with a bumper harvest. And we know that's really challenging. That's part of the lesson. We've had lots of programmes where children have turned up with 2 carrots, because the foxes have dug up their pumpkins or, whatever's happened. So we do it two ways. We start with seed sowing, and then we'll get our gardeners to go in and do a check-in to see how they're going, so that we can support them if they've got a problem. And then they come to market, obviously. Yeah,
it's like the borough. Our biggest job we do is borough market, which is it's basically them growing food and then selling food, the whole circle. Yeah. And that is incredibly successful. And I think you're right, that whole thing about the challenges they face, it's not an easy thing. It's kind of a bit of a metaphor for life in a way, isn't it? Of
course it is.
And I think also you do it, we do a lot of this in Southwark. So a lot of those kids won't have a garden.
Yeah.
A lot of those kids won't have access to a garden and probably not thought about growing food. So I think that, to me, it's always had a massive impact just to, when you turn up there, well, you explain more than me, but that whole market day when they turn up with the produce and we sell it at Borough Market, and the absolute pleasure those children get out of it.
And pride.
Yes.
We've seen many a child hang on to a courgette because it's a bit special. They don't want to give it away. They get very attached. So there's a couple of things there. You're absolutely right. A lot of the families we work with don't have access to green space, but they're often from communities whose grandparents all grew veg. Yeah. Lots of stuff.
So the knowledge is there, isn't it, in the background?
Absolutely. So we can learn a lot from them. The programme you're talking about, Borough Market, is our Young Marketeers programme. It's been running for 10 years now, and we've just taken it out on the road to different cities around England. This year we're in Liverpool, Newcastle, Stroud, and previously we've been in Dorset.
So it's expanding now, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's too good to just keep in London, And this is partly made possible by donations during COVID.
Right.
What we learned, we all learned a lot during COVID, didn't we? But one of the things that we learned is that schools really valued outdoor learning, because it was one of the few things they could do during lockdown. So key workers' kids were in schools, but they had no extracurricular opportunity, outdoor learning in the garden.
It's interesting because they reckon that 3 million people suddenly started buying seeds during lockdown. So it's kind
couldn't get compost to save your life.
No, you couldn't, that's true. It's interesting, isn't it, how it became much more of a strength during that period in a way, and that's why you're saying your Young Marketeers has expanded out of London.
Yeah. So it's really exciting to take it to different parts of the country. And we're learning lots too, because obviously when we're working in Newcastle, the season's so much later. So, our market day is in July, and lots of them were, it was, when they start planting in April, some of the ground was still solid with frost.
Yeah, so it's a different game up there. Having lived in Edinburgh for a while.
At Glasgow, we did the before, and that was we made it up as we went along, sort of like...
Well, I find it also interesting, I think the relationship we have with the teachers is really interesting, because they seem to get a real lot out of it as well. They recognise gardening.
Yeah.
and obviously the result of a better diet and all the other things, the well-being, they've really recognised that and bought into it. And I think maybe that's a massive achievement on behalf of School Food Matters.
Yeah. Well, it just gives them an opportunity to teach in a different way and introduce children that don't have access to the wonders of the outdoor world. And, what a great thing for teachers to be able to do. What a great thing to be able to take children that don't thrive in the classroom to something they can be really good at. And the thing, going back to that enterprise element and being market stallholders for the day, every single year we get a teacher write and say, I couldn't get a word out of Sam in the class. He's turned into a market tradesman. He's a hawker. I've never seen him so so engaged.
Intellect comes in different guises, and we tend to forget that about our kids, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, we've met some real characters at Borough Market. I always remember little Harry in the Trilby. He was one of the... But that is right. You were empowering. Not everybody's going to get the 3 R's and an A level and go on. You have to find these other skills, and it's just another string to the bow of what you do, isn't it? What gardening does.
And I also sort of caution against saying, it's a great thing for those that don't thrive in the classroom, which it is.
Yeah.
It's also great for people who are absolutely A-star and flying.
Yes, you're right, actually.
Outside,
because they need to get their hands dirty. They get out and see something different. Yeah.
I mean, I've been in many a school, just flipping for a second to cooking, because we obviously run cooking programmes too. I mean, where it sings, it's where it's a kitchen garden programme where they've grown and then they cook. So our food teacher, Sharon, does a lot of that work, where she'll go to the school garden, harvest something and then cook with the children. I've been in many schools when they've gone, we do cooking with the kids that aren't up to doing foreign language.
Yeah, you do get this kind of like, especially, I do stuff in secondaries and it's kind of like those kids are palmed off.
Yeah.
You can't sit still in a classroom, and they're just kind of pushed to the side. And we really need to kind of battle that, don't we?
It's about, I really liked the line in the National Food Strategy with Henry Dimbleby saying that we wanted food education to have the same focus as English and maths. Yeah. We need to raise the profile. It's not just a nice to have. It's not
like let's do this on a Friday afternoon because we can all chill out.
And we've got two things. We've got mass health inequality and we've got a climate crisis. Yeah. So just those two things.
A reason enough to be promoting this subject matter. And also, if I garden with kids, I'm teaching them science, I'm teaching them maths, I'm teaching them art. Yeah. All these things come into play, don't they? And you're right, it shouldn't be on the back burner. Yeah. And we need to kind of fight that.
And we're seeing the evidence of climate here, aren't we? And we're seeing what that does. Like the first thing you said when you walked in is you can't do much gardening because
because it's so arid at the moment.
So that is a lesson in itself. We've got to learn about what does thrive in this climate.
Well, the interesting thing of working with kids is they're the people that can change it. I'm sure that motivates you. It certainly motivates me when I garden with kids. I kind of think if there is going to be a swing away from what feels like a bit of a cul-de-sac at the moment, maybe they're the answer to it.
Well, they are. I mean, look at the youth movement around climate. It's so exciting. Yeah. And a lot of when we go into schools and talk about health inequality and healthy diet, we often engage schools through climate, particularly secondary schools. So if we're talking about less and better meat, we're talking from a climate impact. If we're talking about just drinking water, we're talking about single-use plastics. So we change the conversation. I mean, we don't want them drinking fizzy drinks and too many burgers. But that's what we're getting at through a different route. And climate is often a really good way and an essential way to engage young people.
So people kind of get that it's a real subject, and then you can go on to what you're growing and what you're eating, etc. and stuff. And...
I mean, come the revolution, Chris, there will be a subject called food education, like we have religious education, like we have physical education, and it will go from reception all the way
through to when you leave. And and it's ridiculous we're not in that situation now in many ways.
It's such rich content.
Yeah, it is. And like you say, it ties in with all these other aspects of your life. It's not a set aside subject, it's how we live and breathe, and that's what's important about it. Yeah. Profound stuff, Eli. It really is, and I love it. And I know I'll just ask a little bit about organics, because I know you practice natural gardening as well. Her Heritage Seed Library always give us the seeds for the Borough Market. Bless them, Katrina and her crew. And that's quite important to you as well, isn't it? The natural sort of sourcing of food.
Yeah, absolutely. And just having those conversations about the difference. And the other thing is, when we take children out to a farm, we'll get, if we're lucky, if we can get our hands on a farmer, we'll get them to talk about different farming practices and the difference. And it's really fascinating stuff for them. It's that whole stuff about nurturing the soil, and what you put in influences what comes out. It's
that whole cycle,
it's really interesting. So we like to promote organic gardening practices because that's what we believe in. So the first thing to do is to get children growing.
Get that seed up out of the soil.
And then they can think about how different ways of doing it.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that I've always been of the opinion that if I get you to germinate a seedling, I've got you as a gardener. That's kind of one of those, isn't it? And everything follows on, and then you start looking at natural methods, which obviously is a bit like the fast food thing, are less expensive. Bring you into the subject matter closer, because it's not something you just take, eat, move on, or grow and move on. It's kind of a bit more of a lifestyle. Absolutely. So that's what you're ultimately driving for. So I mean, I can't congratulate you enough from the Stephanie I met 15 years ago, starting off, to what you've got going on now. But so I have to ask, there are a lot of challenges still. Some of them will be political. We know that constantly rumbles on. What do you think the future's going to be? Do you have further ambitions? I'm sure you do.
Well, I will keep talking about this sort of, mythical food education subject. And I think you've just got to keep banging the drum, haven't you? Because I want every child in every school to have young marketeers. Yeah. So what we do, we still, despite our growth, we still consider ourselves a small charity. We can't be in 28,000 schools. So what we are going to do is demonstrate by doing. And then the important part of our charity that we haven't really spoken about is the campaigning and advocacy. So everything we learn when we're in a school planting a seed, or in a school dining hall having school dinner, everything we learn, we take to government.
Yes. Because so you're providing evidence then, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
And also I think what you've been very good at is politicians like to be in the sun. They like to be in the light. So if you can provide examples of what you're achieving, then you start to get them on board, don't you?
What a brilliant photo op. Come on.
Yes, it is. Well, we've had the mayor of Southwark, haven't we? So they will come if we make an impression.
They will, because as I said, go back to that thing, I'm the luckiest chief exec in the world. I have an argument that isn't worth arguing about. Is it a good idea? Of course it is.
Yes, it's a bit hard one to knock back, isn't it? Well, I have to say, I mean, if anyone's more interested in getting, finding out more about School Field Matters, there's loads out on social media, isn't there? There's Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, all of that. You have a website? Tell me the website.
Schoolfoodmatters.org.
Schoolfoodmatters.org, and please, I'm sure Stephanie would love to hear from you. Thanks, Stephanie, very much for chatting to me today.
Always happy to talk about school gardening.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Now it's time for some questions from you. So we're going to open up the post bag, and I'm here with Anton. Hello, Anton.
Hello.
And also Chris.
Oh, yeah.
We've got some really cracking questions this time. So the first one is all about tomatoes. So for several years, I've been growing lots of different tomatoes in my greenhouse, and each year the fruits split before I harvest them. What am I doing wrong? So I'm going to ask Chris.
Well, they're not really doing anything wrong, I don't think. I've had a lot of splitting on my tomatoes this year. All mine are outside. I grow them on the balcony or go them down the allotment. They're not in a protected environment. And I found that I had a bumper crop this year, but we had a lot of rain at the end of this drought, and a lot of mine split. So I think it's moisture, it's water related. So I think there is too much moisture, it causes them to split. This means they're not unusable. They just don't keep as fresh as long. Actually, on the balcony where I control my watering a lot more, I didn't have so much of a problem. I think Anton will probably know a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. It tends to be the sort of watering is a little bit uneven. So they might have a very dry period. And then when they get a lot of water, plants can't sort of keep up with their growth, basically. So that's why they end up splitting. So that's just what's happened with you, Chris. You had a dry period where you probably couldn't keep on top of the watering, however hard you tried. And then a lot of rainfall came, and the black tomatoes just started growing very quickly and split. I didn't have so much of a problem in the glass house. If I left them on the plant for too long, then they would split. But I think that happens to most people. But I also invested in a very cheap drip irrigation system this year. It could water 10 pots at a time and just had little drippers onto each pot. And that was absolutely brilliant because it just kept the sort of moisture levels in the soil much more consistent. And it saved a lot of water as well, because the water is being actually targeted to the soil and not sort of evaporating off the top as well. So actually the surface of the pots appeared still quite dry, but when you just sort of scurried down a bit, it was quite damp underneath. So it was just getting to the roots where the tomatoes needed it.
Can I ask you where your water source was? Was that off a water butt?
Yeah, I actually rigged it up to a water butt. It had a little sort of electric pump as well, run from rechargeable batteries. I had a little filter as well to filter it out so it didn't clog up the system, because that's often a sort of problem with drip systems. Also, we were not so worried about the spores from the blight fungus getting into the water, but because it's being delivered straight to the soil rather than being showered close to the leaves, which it can be a worry using sort of water on tomatoes. So, yeah, it works really well.
How long would you recommend putting that drip on for the day? Because you only need short bursts of water, don't you? Most people overwater, don't they? You don't need long for that drip to be on.
I worked out how much it was delivering to each pot, so actually did need to leave it on for about sort of half an hour a day, because it drips out really, really slowly, and that's what gets the soil nice and moist, because it's going out in a sort of slow, steady drip as opposed to just chucking a load on with a watering can.
So it's not transpiring straight away, it's actually penetrating the soil. But half an hour is not a long time, so it's quite important to point out that you don't need to put it on for hours, I suppose.
No, you don't. And the other thing to bear in mind is, like you were saying, you're worried about overwatering. During the autumn, you need to sort of reduce that amount quite drastically, because as the days get really sort of shorter so quickly in September.
I've noticed even indoors, my houseplants are just needing less and less water as the days are starting to shrink.
Yeah, the radiation the plants are getting is really sort of so much less.
Right, well, let's move on. Second question here. I follow no-dig methods in my garden, but I'd like to improve my soil by growing some green manures. Please, can you tell me which green manure you'd recommend for no-dig? As in, are there any that don't need digging in? That's the question. So let's ask Chris, first of all, what kind of green manures are you sowing?
Well, it's interesting because I'm pretty unadventurous when it comes to green manures. I kind of use two. I might use a field bean during the summer, but I mainly use mustard. That's quite interesting because I'll sow them sort of early September. They're very quick to germinate. I sow them very thickly. They come up in a big block. Because I'm in London, and this might not be the case for the whole country, I'm pretty sure it isn't, I don't really see them getting checked by frost, even though they're very fleshy young plants, very vulnerable to cold. They don't really get checked. What I have learned, though, is the following spring is to make sure you cut them down or, fork them in quite early in the game. Because if you let them flower, they tend to get very pithy. And then when you cut them down, they just sit on the soil and they don't break down and the soil doesn't imbibe them. So I'll be interested to hear what Anton says about it, because I think that's worked for me.
Yeah, Chris, I would go along with that. It's particularly important not to let things go to the flowering stage. Once they go into that reproductive stage, then the tissues start to get really pithy. And then, like you say, the material just sits on the surface and takes half a year to break down, which you don't want. So, yeah, I grow no-dig in my garden now, and I do use green manures. It's a bit of a myth that you can't use green manures in a no-dig system. In October, you're quite limited to what you can sow now because a lot of green manures won't get established. You still can sow Phacelia. When you sow it in October, the plants remain quite small and they won't get killed off by a frost. They'll survive into the next season. So you will then need to cut them down and mix them with some compost. Field beans is another thing that you could grow as well. They still germinate in October. But again, I'd be very careful. Like Chris says, you don't want to let them flower and start producing pods. It's very tempting to do that, but they'll be so tough. When I cut things down, I tend to mix them with a bit of compost on the top as well, just because it really helps them to break down. Otherwise, you just end up with sort of green mat of material. Either it dries out or it goes very slimy depending on the weather, and neither's really desirable. So just mixing it in with some compost. Sort of March time is a good time to do that. But Garden Organic, we have actually been trialling the new overwinter green manure mix. I'm always conscious that green manures have often come out of agricultural catalogues and then been stuck straight into gardening catalogues. So our new mix that we've tried, it's got a mix of quite soft species like vetch, Phacelia, forage peas, crimson clover and linseed as well. So we're going to see how that works. We've got about 120 people trying that in different places around the country. It should be quite interesting to see how that works out.
I must admit, I was walking around the Brighton garden just this morning and clover is looking really super, sort of probably 2 inches high. I think green manures they gladden the heart because they look good, they cover the soil, and then you've got that wonderful feeling of knowing that they do great things to the soil later on in the year, getting you ready for next year's growing season. So on to our third question, a bit of a community question here. So please can you advise any options of using an organic weed and feed for my local parish council? At the moment, they spend almost £1,000 on weed and feed chemicals on a 2.5 acre playing field, and I'd like to be able to make them aware of the alternatives. So that's from one of our members called Helen. Thank you, Helen. Great question. Anton, let me just start with you on this, because obviously we're talking about grass.
Yeah, I guess there's been more of a move in a garden situation for people to embrace more diversity in their lawns. It used to be a case where people are asking, how do I get rid of clover? But now we're sort of happy to see it because it attracts the bees. But perhaps in a more, let's say if you've got a playing field or a bowling green or something like that, then those sort of species can be quite slippery and not very practical for sports situations. So yeah, we probably want to look at trying to encourage the grass to grow more and be more vigorous. So I'm going to pass on to Chris because that's really his area of expertise. He's had a lot of experience at that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Anton in terms of I think that I'd love to see daisies and yarrows and clover and all that in grass. They're pollinators. Make the grass looks better. Otherwise, you might as well just concrete and paint it green. A little bit different if you're dealing with sports surfaces. Obviously, that's part of our parks, part of our recreation, and it really kind of comes down to the seed mixes you're using. I think if you're, especially also the soils you're on, if you're on clay soils and it's getting a lot of wear, what tends to happen is it gets bare and then invasive species will come in. For the big field, I would certainly look at very strong ryegrass mixes. They are what traditionally rugby pitches are made of. And then if you've got a poor soil like a clay, which grass tends not to like, then obviously scarifying, tining will help thicken that sward. When I mean tining, I mean spiking it to let the air in, to get the roots down. And scarifying means you're taking all the thatch out and breaking the underground stems, the stolon, and that means that, again, the sward thickens out. You certainly don't need to be using weed killers on it. Make sure you overseed and make sure it's draining properly. When it comes to things like cricket pitches and bowling greens, well, they pretty much have to be a grass sward because obviously it's about the roll of the ball and the bounce of the ball. So you use bents and you use fescues. There's your seed mix. People might put creeping red fescues in because they're quite drought resistant. But the reason you use those seeds is because the grass can take being cut really, 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 really short. And then again, very little need for any kind of chemicals. And you won't need to spend that money on fertilizers and pesticides.
So there's weed and feed chemicals. I'm quite interested in the notion that you wouldn't have to feed it, because obviously this grass, it's going to be under an awful lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of use. And you would say that you wouldn't have to feed it, but if you did, would there be a natural feed that you could recommend? Well,
I mean, there are now coming on the market. Quite interestingly, a lot of organic feeds starting to appear. They were non-existent 20 years ago. But I think that if you're determined to be organic, then make sure overseeding, scarifying, tining are quite organic methods to do it. Make sure your sward's thick. People tend to nitrogen feed in spring and summer to get boosts of growth. It's almost like an amphetamine, if you like, for the grass because it thickens it up very quickly. And then what tends to happen is obviously that runs out and the grass becomes weak again. You're going to get much better results if you concentrate on the physiology of the plant and making sure it can produce new crowns, that it's thickened and overseed it. I think that's the way forward.
How interesting. Sounds to me like they need an army of volunteers on the scarifying as well.
Get them out there with a spring box. 100 of them all walking in a line. That's good fun. That's good exercise. Cheaper than the gym.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, both of you. See you next month.
Thanks, Fiona.
Bye. Thanks.
That's all we've got time for. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, you can get a heated propagator from the Organic Gardening Catalogue this month for just $11.99. Just go to organiccatalogue.com/POD7. If you want to learn anything more about the topics we've discussed or any other organic gardening conundrum, there's plenty of advice on our website at gardenorganic.org.uk. And you can follow us on social media. We're at Garden Organic UK on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. We always love to hear from you, so do get in touch with us if you have any topics or questions you'd like us to cover. Our thanks again to our sponsors, the Organic Gardening Catalogue, and to Kevin MacLeod for providing the music. That's it. Until next month.